In episode 1 of Black Doves, you get introduced to the Webbs, Wallace and Helen. Wallace is the defense secretary for the British government, Helen's his wife, they have twins, and on the surface they look like a normal, happy couple that is in the public eye because of Wallace's job. But no, there's so much more than that. Now it's a few days before Christmas, and the Webbs are hosting a party in a charitable effort. But the one thing on Wallace's mind, and just about everybody in the British government's mind, is the recent death of a Chinese ambassador. The Brits are saying that it was a drug overdose, but the Chinese government doesn't believe it, and they're doing their own investigation. And this is a big deal. While Wallace is attempting to enjoy this get-together, it's definitely on his mind. It's at the get-together, though, that the Webbs are approached by a random woman who thanks them for their time, thanks them for the party, and then leaves. And neither Wallace or Helen know who she is. At least, that's what they tell each other. Helen knows exactly who she is, because the woman, whose real name is Reed, is Helen's boss. That's because Helen is a spy for an organization called the Black Doves. Reed is in charge of it. But Reed being in Helen's house is a breach of protocol. So Helen very quickly catches up to her at the bottom of the stairwell to find out exactly why the hell she's there. Reed tells Helen that at 12:30 in the morning, a man named Jason Davies was killed on the South Bank. Helen is shocked by this news, and she tries to play it off like she doesn't know Jason, but her face says otherwise. While Helen's lying through her teeth, Reed just stops her and says, "I need you to know I've had eyes on you for a while. I know you two are having an affair." Helen admits to the affair, says it was 3 months, and when Reed asks why, wondering if it was working an angle, needing an in for the Justice Department because Jason was a low-level government employee, Helen says, "No, it wasn't any of that. I loved him." Reed goes on to tell her that there were 2 other people that were killed that night. A man named Philip Bray, who was a tabloid reporter, and a woman named Maggie Jones, who worked at a jewelry shop, but she fed the tabloids some stories recently as extra income. And while the deaths aren't connected yet, Reed knows that all 3 of them met for lunch earlier in the day, before Helen met with Jason. Reed shows Helen a picture of Helen leaving that meeting with something that Jason gave her. And she asks, what was it? And Helen tells her it was a Christmas gift that she hasn't opened yet because it's not Christmas. Helen starts asking if she was the reason why Jason was murdered. Was she the real target? Who did it? And Reed just tells her, we don't know. But she asks her if Jason knew anything about Helen's true identity, the Black Doves. And Helen says no. Helen also tells her that Jason didn't tell her anything. She once again reiterates that this wasn't a job, it was 2 people who fell in love with each other. But Reed looks at it as reckless and endangering their organization. And if it wasn't for the fact that she's really, really close to the soon-to-be prime minister, at least that's the way it's shaping up in the next election, then Helen would be pulled from this job. But because of that, she's not going to be. Reed gives her a direct order. Just don't do anything out of the ordinary and keep doing your job for the moment. But Helen's not going to be able to do that. When she does head up back to the party, though, she has to act like business as usual, even though all she could think about is Jason. Helen, though, wasn't the only meeting that Reed had on the books that day. She goes and meets with a hitman named Sam, who she's very familiar with but hasn't been in London in about 7 years. He was called back, though, because of this situation. And the only reason Sam agreed to come back was because Reed told him it had to do with Helen. He and Helen are close. She explains to Sam the details of the extramarital affair, and what she wants is for Sam to make sure that Helen isn't being hunted. And if she is, Reed wants Sam to take that person out. So basically, Sam is hunting assassins. For the time being, though, Sam is just going to post up in a hotel and wait for word on what he's supposed to do next. That same night, though, word breaks on China's investigation into the Chinese ambassador's death, and it's not good news for Britain. They don't believe the story that he had a drug overdose. They think it was foul play. This is going to require Wallace to go into the office and basically spend the majority of the night there. Right before he does leave, Helen asks, "Hey, did you know the one guy, Jason, he was a low-level employee?" But Wallace says, "No, I didn't actually know any of them." With Wallace out of the house, though, this frees up Helen to go searching for answers. And if you're wondering who's taking care of the kids, they do have a nanny, because they're rich. That's what rich people do. Helen heads over to the apartment that Jason was renting, and the landlord answers. Helen explains that she was Jason's partner, she's looking for something, and the landlord's more than willing to open the door and let her in. But she does tell her the police were there earlier and took some things like laptops, some other items. But Helen's not really looking for that. Stepping into the apartment, though, memories come swirling back to her. And as she's having this trip down memory lane, she hears the doorbell. And that's weird because it's late at night. She feels like there's no way this is a coincidence, so she immediately texts Reed that she's been compromised and needs help and sends a location. And Reed forwards that information on to Sam, who heads to the location. And it's a good thing that Helen did this, because she was correct. The two women at the door pose as police officers, and they explain to the landlord that they're there to collect items, but also wonder if Jason was visited by anybody, like a young woman recently. And the landlord says, no, not really. Which has gotta hurt Keira Knightley, because that woman hasn't aged in like 20 years, but I digress. Landlord says no young woman has visited Jason, but does tell both, quote, officers that his girlfriend is actually there now, and if they want, they can go talk to her. That's when these two faux police officers shoot the landlord, which is very unfortunate, and start heading upstairs, and at that point, Helen knows that she's in for it, and she's just hoping that Reed has in fact sent backup, because it's going to be 2 versus 1. For the longest time, though, Helen does hold her own. I mean, she is a badass. She's able to prolong this fight long enough for Sam to show up and use a shotgun, killing one of the assassins and forcing the other one out the window and fleeing. They do know they need to get away from that property as soon as possible, but before they leave, Helen knows that Jason has a safe. She goes to it, she opens it up, she finds an item, and she takes it with her. As Sam drives Helen back to her place, they start getting caught up on everything that happened the last 7 years. Helen admits that she was planning on leaving Wallace for the longest time, but then she had the twins, and he kept rising the ranks. They then get into the whole Jason matter, and Sam feels like Jason definitely got himself involved in something, because you don't just get shot by a sniper on the South Bank. That's exactly why Helen wants to find out who was behind this and bring them to justice. Once they finally do arrive at Helen's house, she makes Sam promise her that he will keep her alive long enough for them to find out who did this to Jason so she can get vengeance. And he says, yeah, no problem. She then heads into the house. She grabs a shower because she was covered in blood. She kisses her kids goodnight. And then she looks at the item that she swiped from Jason's apartment, and it was his hard drive. So she's able to look at all of his text messages. And she sees that even though she told him he had to delete her text messages every day to be careful, he didn't. And it just brings back more memories. But she does see text from Philip Bray, the gossip journalist. And the text that catches her eye says, if it really is Cy on the video footage, then this is huge. There's also a phone number that Jason called 5 times the night he was killed, and it's a phone number that's not saved. Helen writes both of those items down and just files them away for later. Now, while Helen was told that she needs to stay on the sidelines, Sam is supposed to be getting into this whole thing. He's going to need some items to do this, so he heads to a front that looks like a guitar shop but really sells weapons. He grabs a couple of those, and as he's leaving, he runs into an old friend. His name's Arnie, and he's shocked to see Sam. The first thing he does is tell Sam, you're coming to dinner tonight. And Sam says, yeah, okay, fine. As Sam is putting his number into Arnie's phone, Arnie does ask, does Michael know you're here? And Sam says no, and please don't tell him. And that's because Michael and Sam were an item for a while. But after leaving Arnie on the street, Sam heads to the location of Jason's death and starts mapping out exactly where the sniper would be. And he's able to find it. When he finally gets up to the location, he gets a phone call from Helen, who, by the way, is busy infiltrating Wallace's government computer to find out what he knows, aka doing her job. But she called Sam to tell him about Cy, about this random number, because even though she was told to stay on the sidelines, she wants in on this. This death was personal. Sam encourages Helen, though, to stay on the sidelines, knowing full well she's not going to do that. As the two are talking, though, Helen is able to see Wallace's text messages, and a girl named Danny, who's his new assistant, is blowing up his phone regarding her socks. This could be interpreted as innocent banter, or it could be something else, and it definitely raises Helen's eyebrows a little bit. Helen, however, gets back on track with the conversation with Sam. She makes him promise that he will call with any information he gets, and then they hang up. And it's on that rooftop that Sam does get his first clue. It's a bullet casing. Right before he heads to Arnie's for dinner, he stops by a woman who he knows that can get him a fingerprint DNA, and then he heads to dinner. Right before he heads in to dinner, he does get a text message from the woman saying she should have an ID on the fingerprint pretty soon. The dinner goes pretty standard. Arnie, his husband Zach, and Sam all get reacquainted. They do wonder where the hell Sam's been, and he kind of just gives a vague answer of, I had to get away. Eventually, though, this does lead into Sam's ex, Michael, and what he's up to. Zach tells him that he got married, they had a baby via a surrogate, and he's happy. And Sam, lying through his teeth, says, yeah, I haven't really thought about him in a long time, which is a complete lie. But he wasn't the only one who was lying. Later in the night, Sam and Arnie are doing some just recreational drug use, as one does, and Arnie lets it slip that Michael is divorced. And by Sam's reaction, this is big news. Some would say exciting news. He still tells Arnie, don't tell him I'm back, but Arnie admits it's too late. I kind of did tell him you were back. It's around this time where Sam gets a text message telling him that the bullet casing belonged to a guy named Elmore Fitch, and Sam heads out. While Sam was at dinner, Helen, continuing to do her job, met up with Reed in a movie theater to give her information about what's going on in the government. How they're worried about this Chinese investigation turning up evidence of foul play and not just accepting the British government saying that it was an overdose. The real reason, though, Helen showed up was because she wants Reed to run that random number. She doesn't care if Reed gives her the information, but she does want her to run it to give it at least to Sam. Helen heads home, and later that night, she gets a call from Sam, who is outside her place. Because Reed did as she was asked, she ran the number, and she knows who it belongs to. Sam tells Helen that the bullet casing belonged to a guy named Elmore Fitch, who was a hitman. He's got his address, and he's going to head there and pay him a visit. As for the number, it was registered to a woman called Kai Ming Chen, who just so happens to be the daughter of the ambassador who was killed, and a big news story herself because she's missing. So Jason was calling the daughter of the Chinese ambassador the same night he was murdered. They both know that this is big, whatever it is, and they need to do it together. So Helen heads up the stairs, arms herself, and gets ready to pay Elmer Fitch a visit with Sam. In episode 2, you get some backstory about how Helen got into the Black Doves. 10 years prior, she went for a job interview as an interpreter, but red flags raised up. The first being the fact that she didn't go to college, which wasn't a total red flag because she did have a scholarship to Cambridge, but she didn't take it because she decided to travel for 10 years. The big one being her family history. Her mother is dead, but before she died, obviously, she married a guy who was Helen's stepfather. With the stepfather came Bonnie, who was his daughter and who became Helen's stepsister. Bonnie, however, is serving a life sentence for the murder of her biological father, Helen's stepfather. And all of this happened right before Helen decided to flee the country on her little traveling excursion. While this didn't get her the interpreter job, the guy did give her a phone number to call and said, ask for Reed and tell her that I think I found one of her little black doves. Later that night, Reed explained that she was in charge of a group called the Little Black Doves. They were spies. They didn't work for a government agency. They simply worked for the highest bidder. That's it. Sometimes she would be betraying her country. Sometimes she would be helping it. Helen's a little skeptical, but Reed is not. She flat out tells Helen that she is what she's looking for. It's pretty clear after what happened with her stepfather that she's a survivor. But she can also tell that she's had Reed eyed up since the moment she stepped on that street. She has an exit strategy. She's perfect. While other people would just see a cute girl, she sees a weapon that she wants to develop and harness. From that day forward, Helen joined the Black Doves. And her first job was to get information from a then government employee named Wallace. The way she did this was Wallace was speaking at a conference. Helen moseyed on up to him at the bar. They started making small talk. They went up to Wallace's room. They did adult stuff, fun stuff. And while Wallace was sleeping, she got into his computer and stole information. Because this was her first job, though, she was extremely nervous. She flew out of the room. She got in the car and she handed over the flash drive to Sam, a guy who she'd never met before. A guy who really took her aback because their relationship didn't start out on the best of terms. Initially, Sam thought she was rude because Helen was very rushed. She was just flat out nervous. And she certainly didn't appreciate Sam's cavalier, lax attitude. Prime example of this is the fact that she didn't say, hello, I'm Helen, nice to meet you. Still, though, Sam told her she did a good job. Unfortunately, though, she did forget something in the room that she had to go back and get. Even though Sam tried to talk her out of it, there was no way she was leaving the scene of the crime without grabbing this one item. It was a lighter that belonged to her mother. So against Sam's advice, she headed back up to Wallace's room, and Sam said, look, if you're in danger, leave the curtains open. I'll be up in 15 minutes. But if you're not in danger, draw the blinds. When Helen got back up to the room, Wallace was waiting for her. He was surprised that she was back because this did happen in the middle of the night, and he just thought he was never going to see her again. But he was relieved that she came back. And after a tiny bit of small talk, she decided to stay, drawing the blinds and letting Sam know, you're good. Fast forward to present day, and the two are headed over to Elmore Fitch's apartment. Sam, who is completely in the dark about everything regarding the Chinese ambassador, his daughter, gets filled in by Helen. This really tips Sam off into exactly the web that they're currently weaving in all of this. How deep this rabbit hole really goes. It's on the drive over, though, that Helen notices Sam is probably under the influence. And he admits, yeah, I think I did cocaine, but it might have been ketamine. I'm not sure, but I'm fine. Don't worry about it. And it's not like Helen has another option. She can't call another backup. So they head to Elmore Fitch's apartment. They head inside, but he's not there. And while they're planning their next move, Helen realizes all of this is fishy. Because Sam, doing research, found out that Elmer Fitch is a top MI5 sniper turned gun for hire. He wouldn't be so reckless as to leave a shell casing with his fingerprints on it. It's at that moment Sam realizes they screwed up and they need to get the hell out of that apartment immediately. And they do so just in the nick of time before a bomb goes off in it. Sam is really pissed off at himself for not figuring this out sooner. They head back to Helen's apartment. He tells her, text me when it's clear. And after heading inside and confirming that no one's there, she texts him and Sam goes home. But she did so a little prematurely. Because in the middle of the night, when she's in the kitchen just grabbing herself a drink, somebody sneaks in and goes to attack Helen. Helen, though, being trained, is able to fight this guy off, but he does have a gun. And it turns out this mystery assassin is Elmore Fitch. He's not planning on killing her. Not yet, at least. Not until she answers a few of his questions. He tells her that the people that hired him were looking for a digital recording device that they think Jason had. And he wants to know if Helen has it, but she doesn't. He tells her that the camera might have been in possession recently of a woman named Kai-Ming Chen and asks if she knows where Kai-Ming Chen is. But she says, no, I don't. Elmore reminds her that telling the truth is the difference between life and death for her family. And this is the second time since Elmore Fitch has started talking that he threatened Helen's family, and Helen doesn't take it all that well. She gets close enough to Elmore after telling him that he would regret killing Jason, and then a fight ensues, where she wins because she's able to stab Elmore Fitch in the hand, injuring him, grabbing the gun, and pointing it at him. She starts demanding answers on who hired him, but he says it was anonymous. I don't know. They just said name my price. It's clear to her that Elmore really doesn't know any more information, so she takes him outside to the shed, and she shoots him and kills him. The next morning when she wakes up, she just has to act like she's the normal mom, the normal wife, and she's really good at that. She asks Wallace, what are you up to today? And he tells her that he has to go to a memorial service for the fallen civil servant, who's Jason. He heads out the door, and once he does, she contacts Reed and lets her know what happened the previous night. Reed is going to set up a meeting later in the day with Helen and Sam. Before that meeting is to take place, though, Sam goes to get breakfast when he's cornered in the restaurant by a familiar face from his past. It's a woman named Lenny who used to hire Sam back in the day to be a trigger man. And next to Lenny is Williams, the assassin who was pretending to be a cop the previous night but got away, and her new partner, Eleanor. Lenny has come for an apology and a make good, while Williams has come for an apology because she didn't take too kindly to Sam killing her previous partner with a shotgun. But Sam tells both Lenny and Williams, I'm not apologizing for anything, I'm not doing any make goods, kick rocks. Lenny reminds him that he shouldn't be working for anybody in London while he still owes her, for a guy named Hector Newman years ago. It was a botched job by Sam, and now Hector Newman has risen the ranks and he's a problem. So Lenny wants Sam to take care of it, like he should have done 7 years ago, but didn't. You can tell from Sam's face that just the name Hector Newman brings back PTSD. He's very uncomfortable. But Lenny doesn't care, and she tells him, you're going to deal with Hector Newman or I'm going to get these two involved, pointing to both Eleanor and Williams. And Sam isn't worried about those two coming after him. But Lenny says, no, they're not going to come after you. They're going to come after Michael, your boyfriend. He was easy to find. And his little daughter, too. She then slides over a picture of Hector Newman present day, tells him that he runs a drug warehouse in Brixton, and says that if he doesn't do the job, Eleanor and Williams will be taking out Michael. Doesn't really seem like Sam has a lot of options here. After the impromptu meeting, he does head to go meet with Reed and Helen. They meet in a car in an abandoned garage, and Helen tells both of them what happened the previous night with Elmore. They know that if one assassin came, then more are to come, so they need to find out who hired these people. Putting the pieces together, though, they've been able to figure out that if everyone's looking for a camera, there must be a video out there that everybody wants. But since you've got people also looking for Kai Ming, you gotta figure that she holds the key to all of this. Reed's dug into this a little bit, and the three people murdered all make sense except for one, and that's Jason. No one can figure out how he's wrapped up in all of this. Reed once again asks Helen, did you tell him anything that you weren't supposed to? And Helen gets so offended about this that she storms off, telling Reed to stop interrogating her and go figure out who is after them. It doesn't seem like Helen has a lot of faith in Reed doing this. So when she gets home, she hops on the computer and just starts Googling Kai Ming, trying to figure out if there's any news stories that might tip her off, and she does get a hit. It's a clue on who Sy might be. Sy isn't the name, Sy are initials, S-Y. And they might just stand for Stephen Yarg, the police commissioner, a guy that works very closely with Wallace. She needs to make sure that Yarg is involved or he isn't involved. And she knows where Yarg's going to be. It's going to be at the memorial service held at a bar. Wearing a disguise, she sneaks in, she plants a microphone, and she gets out of there and waits for her husband and Yarg to arrive. Wallace arrives a little bit late. He got some unfortunate news regarding the Chinese investigation. They think the Americans did it, and the Brits helped cover it up. They haven't handed over the evidence to this, but if this is the case, it's not good news. You could be looking at nuclear war on the horizon. And this headache has Wallace pretty stressed out. When he arrives at the memorial service, he does seek out Yarg, and the two start talking right near the microphone that was planted, so Helen's hearing all of it. Wallace knows that they might go to war over this if the Chinese truly believe that their ambassador was killed by the Americans on British soil and it was covered up. He then changes the topic, though, and says, we need to talk about Philip Bray, the journalist. He contacted me. He told me he had a story about you and China. He had some footage of you, but now he's dead. So I have to ask, did you have anything to do with the death of the ambassador? And Yarg just gaslights him. He denies it completely, and he says that Stephen just needs some sleep. But this is interesting, because Stephen did tell Helen that not only did he not know Jason, he didn't know any of the three victims, and clearly that was a lie because he knew Philip. After hearing all of this, she needs to just be alone with her thoughts, and for whatever reason she goes and sits down at the bench that Jason was killed at. But she's not the only one that day to go visit her past, as Sam does the exact same thing. He visits Michael's house, and he just stands outside and watches him play with his daughter when he's approached by Eleanor and Williams. They've shown up to kind of just urge Sam to do the job, and Sam knows this. He tells them that he will do the job for Lenny. So to just get all of this out the way, Sam heads to the address that Lenny gave him that's supposed to be Hector Newman's hideout. But when he gets there, no one's there because everybody's dead. Something happened in this place and it wasn't good. He gets to one particular room where there's a mattress and there's a camera set up. And he decides to check the camera, and to his surprise, Kai Ming's on it, but so is Hector Newman. And it's clear that during whatever happened, Hector Newman was able to grab Kai Ming and flee. So now Sam knows who has the missing ambassador's daughter. In episode 3, you get backstory on Sam. For Sam, this was in the family business. His dad, who was a pretty crappy dad, was a gun for hire. Sam grew up watching his dad clean pistols and tell him all about the code of being a trigger man. For Sam's dad, the big code was you have to look a person in the eye because what you were about to do was the most intimate thing that they would ever have. So while he didn't like his dad, he decided to go into that business. He was doing jobs for Lenny while also training Helen on the side to become an elite assassin. The first job that he ever had with Lenny was to kill his father. Now, Lenny didn't know this, at least we think, but Sam did exactly what he was brought up to do. He looked his dad in the eye and he pulled the trigger. And after that, the job got easier. As for training Helen, that also was really easy. While their relationship started off rocky, a friendship quickly bloomed, and they would go to the bars together after training. It was actually after one of these training sessions at the bar where Sam met Michael for the first time. They decided to go out, they started dating, and while their relationship grew, so did Helen and Wallace's. Wallace was quickly rising up the ranks of Parliament, while Sam was happy with Michael. The one issue was, he was lying to Michael. Michael thought that Sam worked in insurance, but that wasn't true. It was one such job for Lenny that would change the course of Sam's entire life. And it initially wasn't known as the Hector Newman job. It was actually known as the Newman Brothers job. Lenny gave Sam 3 pictures. She told him, this is a new outfit. They're called the Newman Brothers. They're making waves. They need to stop. So, should be pretty easy. And there's a 4th brother named Hector, but I don't have a picture for him. If he's there, take care of him too. Sam posted up where they were going to be. He acted like he had car trouble. He fired 3 shots into the van, no problem. But when he opened the van up, he was staring right at Hector Newman. But Hector Newman was maybe 12? And there was no way that Sam was going to do that. After all, he does have morals, he has a code, and he wasn't about to kill a kid. So he spared Hector Newman's life. He got in the car. He called Lenny and he said, yep, job's done. And he didn't think much of it. That is until a couple of days later, when he was making coffee in the morning at he and Michael's apartment, that the door was busted down and people were coming to kill him. Because little Hector Newman had figured out who he was, and they were going to get payback for the brothers that he killed. But Sam, being trained, was able to fight these guys off. He did take a bullet to the shoulder, but he was still breathing and they weren't. There were 2 problems, though. The first being that Michael was absolutely terrified. The second being, there were more of Newman's goons coming. That was just the first wave. Sam knew that he couldn't hold these guys off, not all of them. He needed help, and he called up Helen. Helen, at this point, was 8 months pregnant. I mean, she was ready to pop. But when she heard the tone in Sam's voice, she didn't hesitate to say, I'll be right over. She was going to bail her friend out. While Helen headed over, a very, very scared Michael asked for answers. But without really time to spare, Sam wasn't able to provide any. He just had to tell Michael, you need to stay behind me, close your eyes, we're going to get through this. Step by step, they made their way out of the apartment, Sam acting as a human shield for Michael, and thanks to the help of Helen, they were able to take out all of Newman's people, although Sam did get hit a couple of times. Helen grabbed Michael, looked at Sam and said, you need to run, I will take care of this. And that would be the last time that Sam saw Michael for 7 years. As soon as Helen got Michael safely in the car and started driving away, she called up Reed to get help. She needed an exit strategy for both Michael and Sam. There was one issue. Earlier that day, she approached Reed about getting out of the business altogether. She was about to have twins. She no longer wanted to be married to Wallace. She had secured passports and an exit plan. But this request, saving Sam and Michael's ass, was enough to get her back in the game. That was the price that she would pay to make sure that her friend and her friend's boyfriend would be safe. So it's no wonder after 7 years, when Sam got the phone call that Helen needed help, that he came back. Present day Sam, though, has to go meet with Lenny and tell Lenny what happened at Hector Newman's drug warehouse. And Lenny has a pretty good idea of where Hector would be hiding. But she also knows that that place is going to be heavily fortified and Sam is going to need backup. There's no way that he can do that job by himself. But if he does take care of Hector Newman, they'll be square. Of course, if he doesn't, well, then Michael's going to die. So it's not really an option for Sam whether or not he's going to do the job or not. Because he's going to need help, and he doesn't want to enlist Helen in this, His options are very limited. He decides to go to Williams and Eleanor. And it's definitely a surprise to both women that they're being approached to join forces, especially Williams after what Sam did to her old partner. But Sam's willing to pay. And more than anything, he makes a really good point. That if they do this job and they're successful at it, everybody's going to want to hire Williams and Eleanor. It's going to be great for their reputation. They agree to this, and later that night, the plan is to head to this location and hopefully kill Hector Newman and be done with it. After joining forces with both Eleanor and Williams, Sam goes to meet with Helen. He wants to debrief her on everything he found in the stash house. He shows her the video camera, and he tells her that he's pretty certain Kai Ming is being held in a gang hideout. And Helen, of course, wants to help, but he says, no, I was brought here to protect you. I'll handle this. She then tells Sam everything that she overheard with that microphone, about how the journalist approached her husband regarding some video featuring Stephen. Sam knows at this point that he needs to talk to Stephen, because Stephen probably knows something. And Helen says, well, he's going to be at our children's nativity play tonight. See if you can get him to talk, and get his phone for me. And do me a favor, only hurt him if you have to. I mean, this guy comes to all my kids' birthday parties. We're actually friends with him. So later that night, before he heads off with Williams and Eleanor, Sam heads to the nativity. He's able to distract Stephen Yarrick by calling his cell phone right before he enters the play. And with nobody around, he puts a gun to his back and escorts him into a classroom. He starts questioning Stephen on what he knows, what this video is that the journalist had, but Stephen doesn't tell him anything. The only thing he says is that Sam has no idea what he's trying to get involved in, who these people are, but he doesn't give up names. He does, however, hand over his cell phone. And it's not like Stephen is going to kill him. After all, he's not even looking him in the eye. I mean, killing a guy in a classroom, that's rough, but also he was told by Helen not to do that. So a very ballsy Stephen, I should say a very nervous Stephen, calls Sam's bluff and says, yeah, you're not going to kill me, so I'm just going to leave now. He walks out, he rejoins his wife, but it's obvious by his face that he was terrified by something. Sam then drops the phone into Helen's daughter's backpack, and he heads off to go meet with Williams and Eleanor. When Helen gets home later that night, she starts looking through the phone, and she sees that Stephen was in constant communication with somebody in his phone known as Repair Shop. And Repair Shop had texted him, let me know when it's done, and Stephen replied with, it's done, but there's no indication of what it was. So Helen, using that phone, texted Repair Shop and said, we have Stephen Yarrick's phone, and we will find you. And whoever Repair Shop is responds with, not if we find you first. She then has to get ready that night for a political Christmas party that they weren't even planning to attend, but Wallace is forced to attend. And that's because the Chinese government wants to have a meeting with them, but they don't want it on the books. They want this thing to be hush-hush. And they need a location where they both would just happen to run into each other, and this party is it. Helen doesn't know any of this. She really just thinks they're going to a party. So when she gets there, she goes to the bar, she grabs drinks, and when she returns to Wallace, she notices that Wallace is talking to a cute young brunette. A brunette that matches the description of the girl that was texting her husband a couple of days ago about socks. Wallace introduced the two. Danny, this is my wife Helen. Helen, this is Danny. But before the conversation can go any further than that, somebody grabs Wallace and says, hey, I need to pull you over here for a second because Wallace needs to go to the meeting with the Chinese. This gives Danny and Helen a little bit of a chance to make small talk, but not much, because Stephen Yarrick's phone rings and it's Repair Shop. The voice on the other end tells Helen, this might help you see what you're dealing with. And they send her a video of Stephen Yarrick getting tortured, eventually getting killed. And it is shocking to Helen. While she's watching the police commissioner get murdered, her husband is in the kitchen of this place having a meeting with the Chinese where they present proof of how the Americans killed their ambassador and Britain covered it up. The proof that they have is Kai Ming's boyfriend. It's a guy named Cole Atwood, and they claim he's a CIA operative. And an hour before the body was discovered, you see Cole Atwood on CCTV footage fleeing the scene. He ran straight to the U.S. Embassy. He hasn't left since. As for the British government being complicit, well, they checked the CCTV footage of the apartment, around the time of the murder. Everything was erased. This is all pretty shocking, but Wallace keeps a strong face and says, "Gentlemen, this proves nothing." Eventually, though, Wallace asks, "Why are you bringing this to me exactly?" And they tell him that they have a bunch of military contracts that were initially denied that they want to be reevaluated. Make no mistake, this is a threat. We're going to go to war over this unless you decide to approve these military contracts. They end up leaving, letting Wallace think about this, and it puts Wallace in a really tough position. So when he leaves this meeting, he goes and finds his wife, who is once again making small talk with Danny, and he says, "We got to get out of here." As Helen, though, is saying goodbye to Danny, Danny says something very, very interesting. She says, "When a door opens, a window closes." And that's something that Reed constantly says. And it suddenly reminds Helen of something that Reed said when she tried to leave 7 years ago. That they would replace her. That they identified Wallace as somebody who would be rising in Parliament, and they wanted to keep the information flowing. So while before she just kind of looked at Danny as a minor threat, now she thinks that Danny is working for Reed, and that Danny has been put in a position to replace her. In episode 4, after the meeting with the Chinese, Wallace needs to go debrief with the Prime Minister. He's going to send Helen home, but he needs to head to the Prime Minister's home and let him know exactly what the Chinese have and what their theory is, which everyone thinks is kind of crazy. After all, it is quite an accusation. Because of this accusation, the Prime Minister calls the CIA station chief and asks his opinion. More like an accusation. "Hey, did you happen to kill the Chinese ambassador using a CIA operative named Cole?" And the CIA station chief named Mitch kind of laughs at it at first. He thinks it's a joke. One, he can't believe it's being questioned, but two, he also can't believe that he's the one fielding the question. I mean, it's such an accusation. He thinks the Prime Minister should go to the President. Wallace then steps in and asks, "What can you tell us about Cole Atwood?" But Mitch says, "I don't know who that is." And that's something that Wallace doesn't believe at all. The Prime Minister then questions Mitch on whether or not Cole Atwood is a CIA operative, but Mitch isn't willing to discuss that because, as he tells the Prime Minister, "Your administration's kind of leaky with gossip, and I'm not going to say that right now." The whole conversation, though, takes a turn when they get news of why Stephen hasn't been answering his phone. Because police found Stephen's body. Obviously, the people that are responsible for this are the repair shop. And it's probably about the time that Wallace is learning of Stephen's death that Wallace's wife, Helen, is making a call to the repair shop because she wants to know their family's safe. But he doesn't answer the question. He makes it known that what happened to Stephen Yark is her fault because she's meddling in their business. They know who she is, they can get to her family. And then they hang up. When Wallace gets home, Helen has to act like she has no idea what happened to Stephen. But Wallace is really broken up about it, and Helen has to be the shoulder to cry on. Just like Helen vowing vengeance for the death of Jason, Wallace vows to get vengeance on whoever did this to Stephen. And then, because grief is nature's most powerful aphrodisiac, he and Helen start having the sex. Unfortunately for him, he's unaware of the fact that Helen has her eyes closed and is thinking about Jason the entire time. But what you'll learn through the fantasy is that Helen was lying this whole time about not telling Jason who she really was. She couldn't bear the thought that he was in love with somebody who didn't actually exist, / wasn't actually her. So she revealed who she actually was, a black dove. As Wallace, though, is having sex with his wife, and his wife is mentally having sex with a dead man, you've got Sam, Eleanor, and Williams going in to Hector Newman's place, guns blazing. And while initially Sam didn't like their odds, they're able to easily get their way through Newman's goon squad. Sam, however, gets a little bit careless. He's going room to room looking for Hector Newman, and he's just kind of barging into these rooms. He's not really going around the corner slowly to make sure anyone's just waiting for him, and Hector Newman was waiting for him. When Sam comes through the door, Hector Newman bashes him in the head, knocking him down. Right away, Hector recognizes him as the guy that shot all his brothers but let him live. He asks him, "Did you come back to kill me?" But Sam says, "I came back for the girl." When Hector tells him that a lot of people are looking for that girl, Sam asks, "Who else?" And Hector chuckles and says, "You don't even know who you're dealing with." He then kicks Sam's gun over to him and says, "I think if you were going to kill me, you would have done it already." And then he heads to leave, but not before telling him, "You never should have came back." Finding Hector Newman is something that Sam does not reveal to either Eleanor or Williams, but they do end up finding Kai Ming passed out. I mean, she's a drug addict. Either way, they grab her body, they put her in the car, and they head to Eleanor's place. Williams, though's pissed because at no point did Sam ever mention that Kai Ming was the girl that he was looking for. After all, the first night that Williams ran into Sam, the night that Sam killed her original partner, they were also looking for Kai Ming. They were hired anonymously. They were given some number to call if they found her. She just thinks that it would have been nice to be told, "Hey, we're looking for the same girl." Hearing all this, Sam does apologize to Williams for killing her partner, saying, "I probably should have just put a bullet in her shoulder or something." After they get Kai Ming over to Eleanor's, everybody heads home. The next morning, Sam wakes up, and he can't take it anymore. He's got to go visit Michael. He heads over to Michael's apartment. He stands outside awkwardly, trying to figure out exactly how he's going to do this, and then he doesn't have time because Michael is standing behind him wondering what the hell he's doing there. It's extremely awkward for the both of them, but Michael invites him in. Sam, having not really prepped this, is kind of at a loss for words, and Michael tells him off. First thing he does is let him know that he followed the directions. He never told anybody what happened. But because of what happened, he's constantly scared. Not only for himself, but now for his daughter. And Sam, not really sure what to say, just walks out. Very emotional. For Michael, running into Sam on his stoop was quite a surprise. And Helen also had a surprise that morning. She got up because she had to go meet Reed for a meeting, but when she headed downstairs, there was somebody else in the living room. It was Danny. Danny just decided to pop by after hearing what happened with Steven, knowing how close Steven and Wallace were. She just wanted to let him know that she was thinking of him. Helen puts on the fakest smile she can and escorts her out the door. And then she heads to go meet with Reed. She called for the meeting because an interested party wants her to get to Cole. She explains to Helen that the Chinese government has video of Kai Ming's boyfriend, Cole Atwood, fleeing the scene of the murder. And Cole Atwood is a CIA spy. This interested party is going to pay a lot of money to Cole if he undermines the Chinese government, defects from America, exposes the spy ring. But, once again, that's a lot of money. But the big thing he'll be preventing is a possible World War III. Now, nobody in their right mind believes that he actually did this. It doesn't make any sense. But the thing is, if the Chinese believe he did it, then this could kick off World War III. So really, by him taking this deal and turning his back on America, he'd be preventing nuclear war. The reason why Reed is coming to Helen is because Helen is really the only one that can get to Cole. He's being held in the embassy, which is extremely difficult to get into. But with Helen, who's married to Wallace, it wouldn't really look that fishy. She knows people in the embassy. And there's one woman in particular who Helen is quote-unquote friendly with that Reed is taking it upon herself to set up a meeting with. Just kind of a little catch-up. This will allow Helen to get into the building where she'll deliver the message to Cole, and then it's up to him whether or not he accepts the offer. After the meeting with Reed, Helen gets word on where Kai Ming is, and she heads over to the apartment. Everybody's over there. You got Eleanor, Williams, Sam, and even Lenny stopped by, because after they shot up a place and left 17 bodies, word got out. And what she can't figure out is how out of 17 bodies, one of them was not Hector. So she wants to remind Sam, you need to go get him or I'm going to kill Michael, which is something that gets Helen's ears to perk up. Lenny then leaves, and before Helen can address all of this with Sam, Kai Ming wakes up and she's freaked out. She doesn't know any of these people. She's woken up in a weird apartment. And Helen has to kind of calm her down and let her know, we are your friends. We're here to help. We're here to find the people who murdered your dad. They ask her what she remembers, and she says, we came home from partying and we found my dad. He was already dead. We freaked out because we had a bunch of drugs on us. We didn't really know what to do. I ran to the warehouse where I usually score drugs, started using, and then they realized who I was. I tried to leave, but they wouldn't let me. They just kept asking me questions about Trent, who's this guy that I used to grab drugs from. I think his family had a connection, but I don't really know. They just wouldn't stop asking me about him. Helen then asks about her relationship with Jason, but she says, I never met him. I know he called me a bunch. He said he was Maggie's partner and he wanted me to call him. And that word, partner, surprises the hell out of Helen. She was not expecting Jason to describe anybody as his partner. They then decide to give Kai Ming a little bit of a break. And while the two girls entertain her, Sam and Helen start discussing the situation. Helen filling Sam in on the fact that Reed wants her to get into the embassy and approach Cole Atwood with an offer. In order to do this, she's going to need Sam's help. On the drive over, Helen can't get that word out of her head. Partner. Like, what exactly did it mean? She's thinking the worst. She's thinking that partner is sexual partner. And Sam, being a good friend, says, that has a lot of meanings. It could have been anything. He then tells her about his day, about going to Michael's, about Michael going off on him. And he starts getting emotional just rehashing it. At the moment, these two are kind of an emotional mess, but a little while later, they arrive at the U.S. Embassy and they formulate a plan. She's going to head in for a meeting, and Sam, who is outside in the car, is going to call up and ask for the woman that Helen's meeting with, Vanessa. He's going to say that it's an urgent message. He needs to talk to her right away. This is going to free Helen up to walk around, find Cole, deliver the message, and then wait. While Helen heads inside and is meeting with Vanessa, Sam is just kind of chilling out in the car when he gets a phone call from Michael, and he's surprised. He didn't expect to hear from him. And Michael, now being able to calm down, just has some questions about Sam's career. Sam tries to answer these questions, but it's not really the best time because he is on the clock. And when he asks if he can call Michael back, Michael asks, are you working right now? And Sam doesn't really want to say yes because the implication is, well, yeah, I'm killing people. So he kind of fumbles around it a little bit. Because he needs to get off the phone. He needs to call Vanessa and create this distraction. And he does do that. He's able to do it. He creates a distraction. Helen is able to snag somebody's badge and get to the elevator. The problem is the person's badge that she got didn't have access to the floor she needs to get to. And when the U.S. Marine who was in the elevator notices that she does not match up with the picture, a fight ensues. A fight that Helen wins. But she had to leave the body in the elevator, and of course there's security camera footage. So as soon as she gets off, she calls Reed and says, yeah, we're going to need to find somebody to scrub that. Now on the outside, you've got Sam trying to continue to distract Vanessa. All the while, though, his phone is blowing up with text messages from Michael, so he is getting distracted from creating a distraction. And at that moment, his priority is Michael. So much so that he actually puts Vanessa on hold to be able to call Michael back. He has to make the phone conversation quick, so he just says, look, if you want to ever see me again, just text me yes or no. I'll understand either way, but just send me a message. The good news is, at this point, Helen was able to make it to Cole. She gives him the envelope. She says it's a one-time offer, but before she can question him on anything, alarms start going off in the building because the body was discovered. When Sam hears the alarms, he texts Helen that she's got to get out of there. Helen's able to return to the table before Vanessa does, and it doesn't look suspicious. And because of the alarms, everybody has to file out of the building. So Helen heads right to the car with Sam, and a couple minutes later, here comes Cole. He gets in the car, they drive away, and his main priority is that they hold up their end of the bargain, which Helen says, no, don't worry about it. We're good for it. I just need to know what happened to the ambassador and who's covering it up. He doesn't want to tell her anything because he doesn't trust her. And Helen tells him, we know you didn't kill him, but my friend died. He was in contact with Kai Ming, he knew something, and it got him and 2 other people killed. And that rings a bell for Cole. He says, yeah, Maggie I knew, she was Kai's friend. Philip was some scumbag journalist, and the guy Jason, I don't know how he was wrapped up in all of it. But if the people I think killed the ambassador are after you, then you're already dead. He goes on to explain that he wasn't there as a CIA operative to watch the Chinese ambassador. He was actually there to watch the people who killed the Chinese ambassador. It's a group called the Clarks, and the way he describes it, they're like the Krays mixed with the Freemasons. They took over London without anybody even noticing, and it spread to the States. The reason why I was with Kai Ming was because we traced who she was buying drugs from, and it was Trent. And Trent is a Clark. His mother, Alex Clark, is a head of the London operation. Now, my guess is the Clarks know exactly what happened to the Chinese ambassador because they're the ones that are trying to scrub all the information from Kai Ming's apartment that night. I mean, the Chinese wish that it was me. I mean, think about what they could do with that leverage. A CIA operative killing their ambassador? They then arrive at the address that Reed gave them, and Cole says, "I've told you everything. I want guarantees that you're going to hold up your end of the bargain." And Helen says, "Yeah, don't worry, you're going to get your money." But he says, "Money? What are you talking about, money?" He then shows Helen what was in the envelope that Helen handed over, and it was pictures of his family. He just wants to make sure they're going to be safe. Before they can get into any more questions, headlights pop on. Multiple cars. They're all waiting for Cole. And in one of those cars is Reed, sitting all comfy cozy with Chinese agents. Because of course the Chinese are the ones that hired the Black Doves. With Cole, they can get those defense contracts they want so badly. But Helen isn't about to hand him over. She quickly asks him, "Can you get me to Alex Clark? I'll do everything to keep your family safe, but can you do that for me? Get me to Alex Clark." And he says, yeah, I'll try. Of course, Sam then gets distracted because he gets a text message from Michael saying yes, he wants to see him. But he quickly needs to snap out of it because Helen tells him to turn the car around and get the hell out of there. And then as for Wallace, he spent the night in the office, cozying up with Danny, who did her best to try to seduce him. She even went so far as to plant seeds of infidelity, telling him, "Yeah, there's rumors your wife's cheating on you, by the way." But Wallace didn't fall for it. He told Danny that his marriage was his business, and then he headed home. In episode 5, Helen, Sam, and Cole flee, but immediately they're being chased by the Chinese. It gets to the point where they hit traffic and they just have to get out on foot. They flee into a mall just hoping that the crowd will distract the Chinese, and as they're doing so, they get a phone call from Williams. Because Ellen's place has been hit. The Clarks have found her. They're bogged down and it's not looking good. They need backup immediately. Sam tells them that they'll be there as soon as possible. It's not going to be easy. And then they run out of the mall, they hijack a cab, they get in that, and they head over to Williams' place. But once they arrive, it's too late. I mean, the whole place has been firebombed out. Sam runs in the building to see who is there, if anybody, and the only person he finds is Williams, who is badly injured. She has no idea what happened to either Eleanor or Kai Ming. But what they do know is they got to get the hell out of there fast and get somewhere safe. There's really only one place that any of them can think of, and that's Michael's. And even though Sam doesn't want to, he knows that that really is the only option. So reluctantly, he brings a bunch of trigger men, a bleeding victim. Yeah, he brings the whole gang over to Michael's. And credit to Michael, who in the middle of the night opens his door to these people. Sam starts to explain who everybody is. Hey, that guy's a CIA agent. That person over there, she's a trigger man. You can tell, though, by his face that Sam is truly embarrassed about having to do this. Not only is Michael hospitable, he actually goes and starts getting medicine for Williams, even though she's pretty rude. And as he's doing that, they get a phone call from the Clarks. It's a very simple message. Not only do they have Eleanor, they have Kai Ming. And if they don't hand over the recording device in 24 hours, then the Clarks will kill Eleanor and Kai Ming and not think twice about it. The big issue is no one has the recording device and they don't know where it is. They start trying to figure out exactly how they're going to handle this because they don't know where the recording device is. Sam suggests to just retrace the steps of Jason, but that's not going to be easy. Where would you start? And Helen feels like the only way that they can do this properly is to get Alex Clark in a room one-on-one. She knows that they need to get Alex Clark to this meeting, which means they're going to need to find Trent. And that's going to have to be Cole's job. After this little powwow, everybody needs time to kind of decompress. Sam goes in the bathroom, and Helen follows him in. It's there where she admits to him that she told Jason who she really was. While Sam thinks it was dumb, he is a good friend. He is kind of supportive about it. And to Jason's credit, when he found out she was a spy, he said, "Nothing you could say would make me not love you." Pretty good answer, finding out that your girlfriend is working for an organization that's stealing secrets from your government. This little chit-chat gets cut short, though, when she gets a phone call from her nanny saying, "You were supposed to be here a little while ago." It completely slipped Helen's mind, and Wallace was busy doing defense secretary stuff. They had an emergency meeting to discuss the recent attack on the U.S. Embassy, i.e. what Helen did. The Americans, though, believe that Cole Atwood, who's now missing, was taken by the Chinese, and the Chinese kind of just laugh that off. The mood in the room is extremely tense, and the Chinese representative reiterates that if they don't get compensation for their murdered ambassador, well, they'll have to retaliate. After the meeting, Wallace heads home. He actually gets home before Helen, and right away, Helen has to go into mom and wife mode. But the mood is different. After Danny planted that seed of infidelity in Wallace's head, he's just acting weird. Once the two are one-on-one, he starts asking her about the first night that they met in that hotel room and how much it meant to him. At one point asking her, "Do you have anything to tell me?" He doesn't come right out and say, "Did you have an affair?" but he might as well have. And she, playing the situation very cool, acts like she has no idea what he's talking about. Luckily for her, there's a knock at the door that distracts both of them from this awkwardness, and it ends up being a guy from MI5 who's investigating the attack on the embassy. He claims he's just going through the checklist of people that were in the building that day, and she just happened to be one of them, which is something that Wallace didn't know. Helen, though, plays it off like she didn't really know what was going on. She went to go visit a friend, and it was nothing more than that. And the MI5 operative says, "Okay, yeah, no problem." And it seems like he does believe it. But the visit, for sure, was unexpected. After the agent leaves, Wallace wants to continue this awkward conversation about infidelity without saying the word. And I'm sure while Helen would love to, she got a phone call from Reed. She needs to head out. She meets up with Reed in a library, and Reed starts chastising her for her decision she made the other night regarding Cole, not handing him over. Helen can't believe that Reed is working with the Chinese government, and Reed reminds her that they work for the highest bidder. They always have. She tells her again, "You need to hand Cole over. The Chinese have gotten themselves into a corner, and if you don't hand him over, we could be looking at nuclear war." Helen kind of ignores all of that. She's very stressed out, especially after the MI5 agent gave her a visit and her husband was acting weird. So she gets to the topic on the Clarks and asks, "What do you know about them?" And Reed kind of just knows what everybody else knows, that they're a criminal organization, but that she hasn't really dealt with them. Helen explains that they're looking for the recording device, and they think it shows who actually killed the ambassador. Reed asks if Helen knows where it is because she wants Helen to hand it over if she does. But Helen's concern is whether or not Reed is going to do something about the Clarks. Because Helen still wants revenge for Jason's death. To which Reed, not so subtly, says, Jason was insignificant. You've got MI5 agents visiting you at night. You've got a husband who now is suspicious. Do you really want to risk a career or your life for a guy who is kind of insignificant? She then asks her, "What did Jason know about you?" And again, Helen says nothing, which is a lie. It's a lie that Reed clearly doesn't buy, because she reminds Helen that the number one rule in the Black Doves is, if you betray the organization, you don't just get pulled out, you get killed. Helen doesn't really like that threat, and she reminds Reed of the first meeting they had, telling her, "I still have an exit strategy. My hand is still balled up into a fist ready to swing it." And then she storms out. While this meeting was taking place, news broke of Cole's involvement, or quasi-involvement, in the case. He's all over the news. On top of it, he can't get a hold of Trent, and everybody he calls is saying, "Yeah, we haven't heard from him in like 3 days." This has everybody over at Michael's freaking out. Tensions are high. Especially Michael, who's hosting all of this. To which Sam feels like it's his job to kind of calm Michael down. And he does it. They start talking about their relationship, and it seems like Michael is open to reconciliation. But not if Sam is doing this job. He fell in love with Sam, the insurance agent, not Sam, the trigger man. And what he needs to see is the insurance agent. During this heart-to-heart, Sam gets a phone call, and he takes it. It's Reed on the other end. She tells him she needs him to do one final job for her, and that's kill Alex Clark, which Sam immediately says, "I can't," because of the conversation he just had with Michael. But Reed says if you do it, it'll put an end to all of this once and for all. Killing Alex Clark not only protects Helen, it protects the Black Doves. She also is going to need Cole Atwood. But when Sam goes in the living room, Cole is nowhere to be found, and Williams, who was sleeping, doesn't know where he went. Sam tells Reed to give him the address, and then right before he heads out, he promises Michael that he will come back. He's just got to do this one final job. Of course, when he gets to that address and he starts looking for Alex Clark, he finds her, but Alex Clark's hitman finds him first. And he doesn't kill Sam, but Sam is now Alex Clark's prisoner. That means that the Clarks' deadline to hand over the recording device is still on, and they still haven't found it. But the next morning, Helen realizes where it might be. Remembering what Sam said about retracing the steps, she feels like it might be at the jewelry store where Jason bought her a birthday present. It was the same jewelry store that the other girl who was killed worked at, so Helen heads there. She knocks the guy out over the counter, she closes the door, she finds a safe, and sure enough, there is the recording device. But when she goes to leave, Danny walks in. Because Danny had pressured Reed to let her take care of Helen, how Helen wasn't trustworthy again. And Danny got super disrespectful. I mean, she was bringing up the kids, she was bringing up Wallace. She was loving the idea of replacing a quote-unquote legend. But she didn't, because Helen whooped her ass. And Helen was so nice that she didn't even kill her. She just tells her, when you see Reed, tell her if she wants to replace me, she does it face to face. She then gets in her car and she starts looking at exactly what is on the recording device. And you see what happens to the Chinese ambassador. He was killed, but it was a complete accident. And he was killed by Trent Clark. Clark pushed the Chinese ambassador, he hit his head, he died, and Clark freaked out. He made some phone calls. The person who showed up was Stephen Yarrick. Yarrick immediately starts telling police what to do, scrubbing CCTV footage. But then he says, I have to alert the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister has known about all of this the entire time. And in the season finale, after the little run-in with Danny in the jewelry shop, Helen decides to give Reed a phone call because she's not too happy about it. But Reed says, look, we tried to support you, but you just weren't about it, so we had to put parameters in place to replace you. Sorry if your feelings are hurt. Reed, however, knows that Helen has the recording device, and she tells her, you need to hand it over to me. But Helen's not going to do that, especially when she finds out what Reed did with Sam sending Sam to kill Alex Clark all by himself. In that moment, all she cares about is saving her friends, where all Reed cares about is avoiding a nuclear war. But in this instance, Reed isn't in control because Helen has the recording device and Helen hangs up on her. Without any idea of where Sam is being held, she's going to have to get creative. She noticed in the video that Trent is wearing a hat with a unique logo on it. When she searches the logo, she finds out it's the local stable. So at least there's a lead. But she needs backup. She calls up Williams, who is still hurt from being shot, and the two head over to the stables, where they do locate Trent. And he is this timid, shy, scared kid. And that is before they present him with the video of killing the Chinese ambassador. They want Trent to take them to his mom's. But Trent, who is terrified of his mother, doesn't want to do that. With a gun pointed at his head, though, he decides to reconsider that. He calls up his mom and he hands the phone over to Helen, where Helen makes it very clear that they're headed to the drop-off, but they better not be walking into a trap or they will kill her baby boy. All she wants is to talk to Alex one-on-one. They, though, are not the only ones headed to the drop-off. Reed, knowing exactly what Helen's about to do, gets paid by the Americans for the drop-off location. But the Chinese also know about the drop-off location because they saw Cole Atwood return to the U.S. Embassy. So they're just going to follow his tail. So while Helen thinks that this is going to be an intimate gathering, it's not. Helen, Williams, and Trent, though, do get to the location first. Before they walk in, Helen stashes a gun in Trent's coat, knowing full well that the security are not going to check Trent, and they don't. When they arrive in the abandoned building, the first thing they do is try to free their friends. But before they can actually get out of there unscathed, Alex and her trigger man show up. Helen's a little surprised about the lack of security that Alex brought to this meeting, but Alex makes it clear that if anything happens to her, then all hell is about to break loose, and it will not be good for Helen. They then get to the matter of the recording device, where what's on it gets revealed to everybody in the room, including Kai Ming, who had no idea who actually killed her father. She had no clue it was Trent, and Trent didn't want to tell her because Trent was crushing on Kai Ming. It's one of the reasons he was buying her drugs. While Alex loves her son, it doesn't seem like this is the first time he's screwed up and she's had to clean it up. I don't know if Alex is going to be able to clean up the possible relationship, though, between Kai Ming and Trent after, Trent did kill her dad. Anyway, Helen hands over the recording device, but right after she does so, Alex gets a text message from the Prime Minister saying the Americans are on their way. Because the Americans being tipped off about this video and the meeting was relayed to Wallace, who told the prime minister he has no idea that the prime minister is dirty in all this. And the prime minister, not wanting news to get out about what really happened, had to tip off Alex immediately so that she doesn't get caught up in all this. When Alex gets the text message, she quickly says, all right, we got to get out of here. Let's go. But Helen's not about to let her walk out the door. She didn't get what she wanted. And that's answers for why exactly Jason was killed. It's at that moment where Helen grabs the gun out of Trent's coat, points it at Alex. Alex's trigger man points his gun at Helen, and you've got a little bit of a standoff. But Helen's not backing down. And while she's trying to extract answers from Alex, the Americans show up, the Chinese show up, so you've got a standoff going on inside and a standoff going on outside. Guns drawn on both ends. Sam is pleading with Helen to just walk away. He understands the quest for vengeance, but he doesn't feel like this is the right move. Helen, though, completely disagrees. She's not leaving without answers. The thing is, Alex claims that she didn't have Jason killed, that she has no idea who Jason is. And Helen finds that really, really hard to believe. But then she remembers there's a way to prove this. Because Williams and a few others were hired anonymously, but they were all given a phone number to call if they found Kai Ming. So Helen says, Williams, call that number. And Alex, if your phone rings, I'm going to put a bullet in your head. But when Williams calls that number, Alex's phone does not ring. Trent's phone rings. Trent walks over and gets on his knees, begging for his life. Alex is doing the same thing, trying to claim it was her all along. She's just trying to cover for her boy. With Helen having a gun pointed at his head, Sam is begging her to not do this because Trent's a kid. He's a teenager. Eventually, though, Alex makes a play for Helen's gun. That causes Sam to grab the trigger man's gun and shoot him. The sound of a bullet going off gets the Americans and the Chinese to start firing outside. But inside, Sam decides to shoot Alex, and then he shoots Trent. Helen's a little upset that Sam took the kill from her, but it just seems like Sam didn't want that to be on Helen's conscience, killing someone so young. Before they can leave, a phone rings, and Sam realizes that it's Alex's. When he answers, though, there's a different voice on the other end. The voice tells them that they were being watched this entire time and they will be held accountable, which prompts them to get out of that building immediately. While Helen is leaving, she gets approached by Cole, who seemed to be the only one that actually survived this standoff outside. It's a good thing she ran into him because she's able to hand over the recording device, and she tells him, "You're exonerated on this. Just show this to the Chinese and you're home free." He appreciates it, and he decides to return the favor by letting her know that he is aware of who she is, but he's also really, really good at keeping secrets. When the Americans get the recording of what actually happened, they're thrilled because it means China's going to back down. But the big bombshell on the recording is the fact that Stephen Yarrick was involved and the Prime Minister was mentioned. The CIA station chief, Mitch, tells Wallace this when he has a meeting with him, how there were names mentioned on the tape. Wallace, though, who is in the dark, asks, well, who was mentioned? And Mitch realizes that Wallace really didn't know any of this, which is a good thing. It means that he's probably clean. But what it also means is Wallace is likely to be the next prime minister. And after Mitch leaves, it dawns on Wallace who would have been mentioned that would have been a big deal. He realizes that the prime minister was probably dirty. That night, Helen has to go debrief with Reed. She tells Reed everything about Trent, the recording, what happened, all of it. That's when Reed lets Helen in on everything she knew this whole time. She says what the Chinese didn't know and the Americans didn't know is that someone was watching the ambassador's family this entire time. And it wasn't Cole, it was Maggie, Kai Ming's friend, who had hidden a recording device in Kai Ming's apartment so that she could sell dirt to the tabloids, which was Philip. When the murder happened, Maggie went to go get their camera, but what she forgot is that Philip also had access to that recording device. He was able to see the footage. And once Philip saw it, he went to Wallace trying to get to Yarrick. Yarrick got spooked, he went to the Clarks tried to cover it up. They did this by following Philip, who had the meeting with both Maggie and Jason. After that, the murder started happening. As for the reason why Jason was even involved, it was because Maggie trusted him. Because like Maggie, Jason was an agent working for MI5. And that is a bombshell that Helen was not prepared for. She suddenly feels played. She starts questioning the entire relationship, whether it was real or not. Jason was a part of a small task force set up in MI5 to look for leaks in the government, and Helen was identified. So he was put there to try to find out if Helen was a spy. But when he filed his report a week before he died, he put that she was not a spy, knowing full well that she actually was, which means that that love was real. And that's a big relief to Helen. Reed then hands over a flash drive full of all the information she could find about Jason and who he really was. She then informs Maggie on everything that's about to go down with the Prime Minister. How in a couple months he's going to resign due to health reasons, but it's not actually health reasons. And that's going to promote Wallace to PM, which means that she's going to be even more involved with the Black Doves. After the meeting, Helen doesn't head home. No, she goes to the bench that Jason was killed on and starts thinking. And after doing so, she realizes she wants to remember Jason just the way she does now. She chucks that flash drive into the river. As for Sam, he returned to Michael's apartment, but they don't talk about what happened. They just decide to have a quiet night. Quiet night, though, gets interrupted. Sam hears something in the living room. He goes to check it out, and to his surprise, it's Hector Newman. Hector isn't there, though, to kill Sam. He tells Sam that he actually hated his brothers, but he had to try to get vengeance because his mother was heartbroken after all 3 boys were killed. After the most recent events, though, with the Clarks, well, it's only a matter of time before they come after the guy that's responsible for those murders. And Hector knows that Sam's all on his own. This is convenient because Hector is all out of muscle. So he offers Sam a job. This would allow Sam to stay in London, but he would be working for Hector Newman. And while he doesn't give him an answer, he sure as hell is going to take the job. Sam, though, has to do one thing. Clear this with Lenny. He has to make sure Lenny's not going to be coming after him. So he goes and meets with Lenny and explains, I'm taking a job with Hector Newman, and I need to know that you can just have the situation be water under the bridge. And if you can't, well, then I got to shoot you. But if you can, I can walk away. And after staring Lenny in the eye, he realizes, yeah, Lenny can let this go. So he leaves to enjoy Christmas. The next day, he gets a phone call from Helen inviting him over to celebrate Christmas with the family. They're going to tell Wallace that he's an insurance agent. But at one point, they head outside to have a smoke, and he gives Helen the news that he will be staying in town. She then asks about Michael, but he gives the indication that that's probably not going to happen. They do end on good terms, though. Everybody goes off. They enjoy Christmas, including Reed, who is sitting there with some random blonde woman. I don't know if it's her daughter or another Black Dove, but it's somebody. And that is the end of Black Dove Season 1. Thank you so much for getting this part of the recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel or even becoming a member. It helps pay bills. Another way I can help pay bills, you can buy merch. I have t-shirts and hats and hoodies and stuff. Be nice in the comment section. If you didn't like something, just keep it moving because I'm soft and nasty comments make me feel bad. But just know, when Season 2 rolls around, I'll be here. Hopefully you will too. Thanks so much again.